On April 22, 2020, David Beasley, Executive Director of the UN World Food Program, said a famine of biblical proportions could trigger worldwide starvation for millions of people. In addition to the already 135 million people facing acute hunger this year, the coronavirus pandemic may lead another 130 million people in developing countries to possible starvation by the end of the year. In other words, the UN says a total of 265 million people may suffer and die without aid and help. The consequences of the pandemic and all the lockdowns may prove more significant than the coronavirus itself. For the world's poorest countries, the pandemic has hurtled the world into a global recession. This has resulted in millions of people losing jobs through closings and lockdowns, and hundreds of millions having to deal with hunger. The rapid increase in the number of people that can't feed themselves in third world countries is very alarming. The recession has resulted in a loss of income for people already living on the edge. Nearly 1.6 billion of the world's 2 billion informal workers, nearly half of the global workforce, have already lost their jobs. Since many of these families live hand to mouth, they won't be able to rely on a daily wage to allow them to eat daily. The problem really isn't a shortage of food. The coronavirus lockdowns caused a few short-term supply problems, but localized shortages on certain products like meat and fruit have upped prices higher beyond the reach of people no longer employed. The bigger problem is that they're not earning enough money to eat or to eat properly. This is many times more troubling in the poorest countries, with some people spending nearly 70% of their income on food. From country to country, you can get a better idea of how devastating the pandemic has become to impoverished and hungry people. For instance, in India, half of the workforce lost jobs overnight after the government enforced one of the world's most restrictive lockdowns. In Africa, where social distancing is virtually impossible for 65% of the population, these people usually wake up in the morning, go out to look for money to buy food, and then come back and eat their meal. Now there's little to no money to obtain food. Other examples include Latin American nations, where the number of malnourished people has increased 269%. In Eastern and Central Asia, the problems are much the same, with an increase of 135% now considered malnourished. Sub-Saharan Africa is seeing their hungry and malnourished citizens almost double since the pandemic started. Even if they have work, living day to day, the world's poorest people don't have the ability to take time off from work to stockpile provisions. More than 2 billion people worldwide are considered informal sector workers, having no access to sick pay or time off. What can be done to find relief for the growing number of malnourished and hungry people around the world? Obviously, the pandemic must be brought under control and lockdowns eventually disappearing. Companies and employers hopefully will come back and hire back workers. The more fortunate nations of the world will quickly need to offer aid and relief assistance. Some people and businesses may benefit from cash grants and bailouts. Extensive debt cancellation and additional IMF support would no doubt help. A horrible situation where possibly 265 million people could die by the end of 2020 because of the virus, lockdowns, joblessness, food chain shortages, and skyrocketing prices. I'll leave you with what the Bible says concerning the poor, why those of us who can should try to help. Those who give to the poor will lack nothing, but those who close their eyes to them receive many curses. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Finally, Jesus said, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. Pray for the people around the world in hunger and despair. This is H.A. Graves.